It has been a cold night since I left the station after doing so much paperwork. Afterwards, I wanted to get away, as my colleagues were going to this Irish bar in downtown Boston to meet up with the others. But I was proud of being in the U.S. Marshal Service for 11 years. For me, I drove around and then decided to leave the city. I decided to go to this beach. Even at night, it looked beautiful. But unbeknownst to me, my gas tank was half empty and I needed to charge my phone. And to make matters worse, I had a flat tire. So I spotted this beach house that wasn't too far away. I slowly drove up to it. Hopefully I could speak to the homeowner or house sitter if I could charge my phone and call AAA. But there I spotted a woman sitting, or so I thought at first, since it was a little difficult due to the nightlight. And when I got a better look, it was a doll. A human-sized doll wearing Victorian clothing. I was pretty freaked out by this, seeing how detailed it was even from a few feet away. Of course, no one was home, as I saw no vehicle in the driveway. As I walked away, I heard the door open, and as I looked back, there was no one there. Now, as if I wasn't already freaked out by the doll sitting, having this door open by itself was unexpected. But being the off-duty agent that I am, I closed the door. As I did so, out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone moving. And when I looked out of the window from the outside, the doll was no longer sitting. My mind was racing as I saw this. I, a full-grown adult, walked out of there fast. As I walked towards my car, I heard footsteps behind me. I paused and looked back, but I didn't see anyone. Observing the area where I stood, I walked back to my car and heard footsteps again. I looked back and saw the silhouette of a woman. "Hello there, ma'am," I called out. As she walked towards me, it was the doll, wearing its scarlet and red Edwardian ball gown. I was in disbelief. How did this doll even get out of the house? I tried to grab my gun, but realized that it was in the car. Panic rising, I decided to take my chances and sprinted towards the car. The footsteps behind me grew louder and quicker, echoing eerily on the deserted beach. My heart pounded in my chest as I fumbled for my keys. And finally, I managed to unlock the car door and jumped inside, locking it immediately. Through the window, I saw the doll approaching, her lifeless eyes staring directly at me. A chill ran down my spine as she reached the car and pressed her porcelain face against the glass. I could feel her cold breath on the other side. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was I losing my sanity, or was this some twisted prank? I had no time to dwell on it as the doll's expression turned menacing and her hand reached for the door handle. In a state of panic, I realized my tire was flat. I tried to start the car, but it wouldn't budge. Desperation and fear surged through me as I looked around for help, but the beach was deserted and the darkness seemed to close in. As I sat there, heart pounding, the footsteps grew nearer. I turned to see the doll, now standing just outside the car, her eerie gaze fixated on me. I could barely believe what I was witnessing. A doll that had come to life. I frantically searched for my phone, hoping to call for help, but it was nowhere to be found. In my haste to leave the beach house, I must have left it behind. I was trapped alone with this malevolent doll. The doll's lifeless lips moved, and I heard a chilling whisper that seemed to come from all directions.
"You cannot escape, Agent. Embrace your fate."
Fear gripped my heart as I felt an unseen force constricting around me. I tried to open the car door, but it wouldn't budge. The doll continued her haunting chant, and the air grew thick with an otherworldly presence. In a last-ditch effort, I reached for my gun, hoping it would protect me from whatever dark force had taken hold of this doll. But as I grasped the weapon, I felt a strange sensation spreading throughout my body. My limbs grew heavy and my vision blurred. I realized with horror that I was losing control over my own body. The doll's power was consuming me, bending me to her will. With a final surge of strength, I fought against the invisible grip, trying to resist the doll's malevolence, but it was no use. My body moved on its own, and I found myself stepping out of the car, drawn toward the doll like a moth to a flame. As I stood before her, the doll's eyes seemed to turn black. I was now under her control, a pawn in her sinister act. I had stumbled into something beyond comprehension, a force of darkness that defied all logic. The doll spoke again, her voice a haunting echo in my mind.
"You will be with me, Agent, for eternity."
"Like heck I am," I answered back. I knew I had to put an end to this nightmare. With my heart pounding in my chest, I aimed my gun at the doll's lifeless figure. In a swift motion, I pulled the trigger, shooting her square in the chest. To my horror, she didn't even flinch. Instead, the doll's eyes gazed at me and pushed me to the ground, sitting on top of me. Before I could react, her cold, plastic hands gripped me with surprising strength. I struggled against her, my mind racing for a way to stop her. My left hand was free. And then an idea struck me. In a desperate move, I reached for her, feeling for something, anything, that could disable her. My fingers brushed against a strange, soft object that was throbbing, and with a surge of determination, I pulled it out with all my might. To my surprise, it was this abnormal rubber heart adorned with mysterious runes, gushing out an odorless liquid from its rubber veins and arteries. Or were they tubes? As I held her heart in my hand, which was bigger than a mango, the doll's movement ceased. Her once fierce grip loosened, and her lifeless eyes stared back at me, now devoid of their malevolence. I realized that this rubber heart was the source of her power and the key to her malevolent existence. With a mix of fear and awe, I watched as the doll's body went limp, its life force severed from the unnatural heart. I had stopped her. The nightmare was over. As I stood there, still trembling with adrenaline, I knew I couldn't leave this cursed heart behind. I had to make sure it would never harm anyone again. With determination, I secured the heart in a sturdy wooden box that I found next to a bin, still beating, and locked it away safely. I didn't know what I would do with it just yet. But one thing was for certain. I couldn't let it fall into the wrong hands. As the sun rose, casting its golden rays over the beach, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The nightmare that had haunted me was finally over, and I could return to my life as a U.S. Marshal. Most people know the rules of Marco Polo. I doubt anyone who grew up in a neighborhood with a community pool survived their childhood without playing this game at least once. One child selected to be it closes their eyes and shouts, "Marco!" All the other kids yell, "Polo!" in response and try to avoid getting caught by the child who's it. There's always a moment of mild panic mixed with a sense of giddiness for the closest child responding with "Polo" as the kid who's it hears them and lunges forward to catch their prey. If the kid who's it successfully catches their victim, that hapless boy or girl becomes the new it. My friends and I played this game all the time when we were little, except that we lived in a more rural area of town on the outskirts of our city's suburbs. Instead of going to a crowded neighborhood pool every summer, we had a sizable nearby lake. I remember cutting through my neighbor's backyard toward the woodline each summer, where a small dirt path wound its way downhill for about a quarter mile through the trees until I reached an enormous clearing. There, beyond the trees and a small stretch of knee-high grass, sat a large, crystal-clear lake. It seemed enormous to a 10-year-old me at the time, but I don't recall its actual size. All I know is that one of the older boys, Brock, claimed he swam down to the bottom and told us that it was probably 12 to 15 feet deep. About 30 yards from the shore was a small floating dock which we enjoyed sitting on and watching small schools of fish dart around shafts of light from the afternoon sun. The fish would occasionally swim right up to this small hole in the lake bed, but would quickly swim away. The fish would occasionally swim right up to this small hole in the lake bed. The fish would occasionally swim right up to this small hole in the lake bed, but would quickly swim away as if startled by something inside. Brock bragged to me and some of the other kids that he swam down one time to investigate it. He never went inside because it would have been a tight squeeze, but he said that the water around it was noticeably warmer than the rest of the lake, and it seemed to be lined with smooth rock. As I mentioned, we loved playing Marco Polo in this lake during the day, but during the hottest parts of the summer, about 9 other kids and I would head down to the lake to play Marco Polo at night. We'd tell our parents we were going to a nearby field to play flashlight tag and then double back towards the lake when we were safely out of sight. Once we got there, we'd put on our bathing suits and swim out to that small dock I mentioned. We'd make sure to do this on clear evenings so we could see each other in the moonlight. The last time we ever did this, there were exactly 10 of us in total, counting me, 6 boys and 4 girls, all around that 12 to 10-year-old range. Becky, a small freckled awkward girl with eroticism, meaning she had trouble pronouncing the letter R, was picked to be it first. She wasn't the best swimmer and flailed around haplessly for a good 5 minutes, maybe longer, repeatedly shouting, "Marco!" Due to her speech impediment, though, this sounded more like, "Malco!" We responded with the obligatory "Polo!" each time, but as the minutes dragged on, I started to feel more and more sorry for her. Best I could tell from keeping tabs on where everyone was, we had all managed to maintain about a good 15-foot gap between her and us. So I was surprised when I heard her shout in triumph and announce that she'd caught someone. Last I checked, there was no one remotely close to her. I shrugged it off because, despite her awkwardness, I was fond of her and was relieved she'd actually managed to catch someone. Whoever Becky caught, though, was a much better swimmer than she had been. Such a good swimmer that I decided to escape to the safety of the dock despite the risk of getting called out as a fish out of water and thereby becoming the new it. From here, I quietly sat and watched the rest of the game unfold. As I sat on the dock, trying to remain as still and quiet as I could, I started to sense that something was off. There was just enough light that I could see the person who was now it. It was a girl, though I wasn't sure exactly who because I couldn't make out any facial features. Part of what unnerved me was that she sounded a lot like Becky. She pronounced her R's the same way, so when she called out Marco, it also sounded like Malco. Something else was strange about the voice, though, and it took me a minute before I realized what it was. It was a couple of things, actually. Her voice was completely monotone, and it almost had a robotic quality to it. She also emphasized the wrong syllable, so it sounded like Moco. Additionally, she never paused to allow anyone to respond. It was just Moco, 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 over and over again. This was odd, yes, but it made me more curious to know which one of our group it was. I decided to figure it out by the process of elimination. I was the only one on the dock, and there were 10 of us in total, so there would have been 9 in the water. It took me a couple of tries due to the low light and the fact that I was convinced I had miscounted. I began to panic, though, as I realized there was an extra 10th person in the water. I quickly shouted to everyone to get out. There was a moment of confused hesitation, but some of the others must have also sensed something was way off because after that pause, everyone swam for the dock as fast as they could. One by one, everyone clambered onto the dock and huddled together. Everyone, except Becky, that is. Everyone, except Becky, that is. She was still trying to swim away from this weird girl as fast as she could while crying for help. Brock and I almost dove back in after her, but it was too late. In an inhumanly fast and fluid motion, the girl who was it surged forward while at the same time rising out of the water. For a split second, the image of her doing that reminded me of one of those mermaid figureheads at the bow of an old sailing ship. For one horrifying moment, the girl, or whatever it was high enough out of the water that we would have been able to see her legs. If she'd had them, that is. Instead of legs, after her waist came a pinnacle of what looked like smooth, slippery flesh. It reminded me a lot of a hand puppet where you could see a little bit of the puppeteer's arm. Almost gracefully, the girl puppet thing fell on Becky, grabbed her in a tight embrace, and pulled her under the water, leaving behind nothing more than a splash, and then a small, vortex-like swirl. The wispy clouds suddenly cleared, and in the moonlight, I could see this abominable tentacle puppet thing retract into that hole at the bottom of the lake. It got stuck for a moment as it tried to force Becky into the hole with it, but once it managed to do so, she completely disappeared into a dark cloud of blood mixed with sediment and air bubbles. As if a spell had broken, everyone suddenly dove into the water towards the shore, screaming and splashing in panic. It felt like it took an eternity to reach the safety of the land. I kept thinking that at any moment I'd look back and see that thing chasing after me, imitating Becky's voice and calling out, "Moko!" We were met at the shore by some of the angry parents who'd been woken by all the commotion. While none of our parents ever believed our story about the puppet thing that had mimicked Becky and dragged her under, a subsequent search by police divers revealed the hole, and just inside it, the tattered remains of the unfortunate girl's swimsuit. It was too tight a squeeze for the divers to get into it, so nothing else was ever found. They simply covered up the hole as best they could, erected a chain link fence blocking off that section of shoreline, and put up a sign warning people away from swimming in the lake. I don't think that hole remained covered for very long, though. A few months after Becky disappeared, I snuck out of my house one final time to sit a safe distance from the shoreline, watch the sunset, and say a final symbolic goodbye to Becky. I'd been seeing a therapist for all the good it did at the time, and I thought making this gesture might help bring some sort of closure and healing, even if it didn't stop the frequent nightmares and panic attacks. As I watched the sunset over the lake, my eyes caught a ripple in the water. I froze as, a moment later, this was followed by the puppet-like silhouette of that mimic creature cutting through the water like a mermaid figurehead at the bow of an old ship. In lazy figure-8 motions, it swam around. An unsettling voice emanating from it mimicked Becky in a never-ending monotone. "Moko, Moko, Moko." There was another noise in the background that gradually seemed to become louder and louder until, a full minute later, I realized it was me, screaming and sobbing hysterically. With that, I turned and ran. Oh, Pearls. It's just the vibe you're going for, right? A relaxing day at the beach. Just the vibe you're going for, right? Just the perfect little touch to complete your aesthetic. Wrong. Terrifyingly wrong. Do not wear pearls in the ocean. I learned it the hard way. I learned that the ocean is angry. The creatures of the ocean are angry. You can hear its hissing if you get close enough. If you have something it owns. If you have something it wants. I don't have any other way to tell this story. Ever since I was little, I was fascinated by the waves. I nearly drowned twice, and if you'd ask me what drowning feels like, I would have to tell you that not everything feels like another thing. Though for now, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me clear it up. I still live in my childhood home with my family. My parents are pretty ordinary people. My dad is a vet and my mom is an accountant, and we had never been poor by any means, but we had never been filthy rich either. This big house by the shore is pretty much the one really valuable thing we own. My mom loves it here. She taught me how to love it here. And for some time, my aunt has been visiting us madly. For about a year now, I'm either greeted by her and my mom on the front gate when I'm back from school, or I see no trace of her in the house, even if her car is parked in our backyard. I think that car has not been out of our property for a straight year. I always thought that she found it more convenient to come and go by the bus, since I remember her telling us that it is hard to find a parking space near her house. I'm pleased that she's here because, honestly, when I'm alone, the huge property seems haunted by silence most of the time. And the shore does too. There's hardly anyone swimming or even wandering around the beach besides me because the first entrance is too rocky and the way that the mountains are shaped brings in a constant howl of wind. No one likes these. I tend to find them comforting. This may be selfish, but the true reason I liked having my aunt around wasn't really her chattiness. She was a fine, cute lady, don't get me wrong. But she was just another fine, cute lady, all right? I had always found her to be a little too superstitious. Still, I liked the fact that she liked the sea like me. She seemed even more compassionate in a weird way about going to the shore, but I didn't really question it. I remember thinking her getting ready to go seemed a lot like a ritual. Still, I didn't really care. This particular day, I remember seeing her braid her hair effortlessly while casually lying on the sand, and her white hair looked flawless. Few pieces that she forgot to tuck in were floating in the air, and for a second, I thought it was mesmerizing. I somehow convinced her to swim with me. This was the first time that she was actually down to do so, and I had always imagined she was a bad swimmer and was ashamed of it because my aunt was a pretty prideful woman. Oh, I was wrong. I was so wrong. Once my body fully hit the ice-cold water, I opened my eyes and let the nature burn them with its salty water. I had never once actually tortured myself. I did it frequently. I hid it under the name of nature. This has nothing to do with the story. My mind is going feral now that writing all this made me freak out even more. Well, my eyes got used to the torture. I saw 2 legs speeding away from me. In my mind, I knew it was my aunt, but that didn't even make sense to me. And then I remembered she took off all her jewelry before diving in, just as she insisted on wearing a blue swimsuit. Just like she showered herself clean before swimming. Who does that? Why would you do that? I now have my theories. I sped up trying to catch her. She might be a good swimmer, but it was her first time swimming here. She didn't know the line she shouldn't cross. My mom used to call it the no-no line. It was all the eternity after that one green flag that she made my father stick into a rock when I was little. That was the most we were allowed to go. She was getting closer and closer to the flag without even acknowledging it being there. So I decided to dive even deeper. Take a huge breath, close your eyes, dive as deep as you can. I sensed my pearl bracelet sliding up as far as it can go on my arm. I swam to where I thought my aunt would be, and I couldn't open my eyes because of the pressure. I opened my hand trying to grab her when I got close enough, and after seconds, I did in fact grab something. Or it grabbed me, I'm not really sure. At first, the hand held mine gently, but then it dragged my body towards itself, and when the grip got tighter, I could feel claws, making my skin tingle. I was running out of breath, and the thing kept dragging me down and down to the bottomless blueness. The claws got tied to the bracelet I loved so much, and it fell apart. It was the one real piece of jewelry I owned, combined with its matching earrings, because I had lost the necklace of this combination a long time ago. And when the bracelet broke off, I heard a subtle hissing, both from whatever was holding me and from the sea itself. I couldn't help but think during all of this. I couldn't stop wondering, how did my mother know? How did she know where to draw the line? Then I focused on the one thing that mattered right then and there. I mean, besides my horrible fear of death, but I'm guessing you can already imagine that. What happened to my aunt? What is happening to me? Again, duh, of course. But did the same thing happen to her? I started feeling the suffocation. That thing couldn't go any deeper, or I had completely lost my sense of direction, when I felt another touch, one of its hands letting my wrist free while the other still holding. Then, with its sharp nails, it grabs one of my earlobes. The second hand follows, and now I'm being held only by the grips on my ears. It felt like I was going to explode, and yet I could do nothing. If you asked me what the fear of death feels like, I'd have to tell you that not everything feels like another thing. But I felt another thing in that deep fear too. Shock, pain. The claws grabbed my pearl earrings and took them, cutting my flesh so effortlessly. And adrenaline can make you do a lot of things, guys. Just seconds before I lost consciousness due to apparently drowning, I opened my eyes in shock. It was definitely something. And if you'd like to think that it is pretty, I have to inform you that it is not. It was something. There was something. It existed, but I cannot explain its presence. With my brain chemically shutting down and with the nature of that thing, the only features I can really remember were its eyes that looked like shiny little buttons and a grin that covered its face from ear to ear. While blacking out, I saw its white, shiny hair floating in the sea. It acknowledged my realization. And then, it grinned at me. I always loved to swim in the ocean. For some reason, I could hold my breath for long periods of time, which let me stay under the surface for an ungodly amount of time. I also had good arm and leg strength, which is how I could swim around quickly. My parents knew this ability, and they often took me to the beach for me to enjoy swimming around for hours, swimming around like my life depended on it. The sea was a big part of my life, and it was like family to me. I loved it, and I never wanted it to go. When I turned just about 23, I got a job as a diver. My task was to go explore the seafloor, as only 5% of the sea was discovered. But due to my unique lungs, not something my doctor can ever explain, I can last just about half an hour underwater without air. Some have joked that I'm just a waterproof robot, but it's hard to explain to people who don't listen. Are you ready for your next mission? Those were the words of my boss informing me of my task. I needed to explore the area in a place called the Challenger Deep, which is located at the southern end of the Mariana Trench. It's pretty deep, and water pressure can be difficult to deal with, but despite my boss insisting that I get a submarine to help with my safety, I promised him that I'd come back in one piece. And even if I die, my research would help a new generation of sea exploration, which he finally agreed and let me go. I was sitting on the boat taking me there, and I was slowly approaching the destination. The driver slowed down the boat as we were directly above the Challenger Deep. Just note, I was ordered that once you leave the boat, you aren't allowed back on until at least an hour. No turning back. Are you sure you're ready? I nodded my head. And after putting on my diver gear so I can see, and attaching a camera, which was waterproof, which should be obvious, I plunged into the water and started swimming down. The sea was slowly getting darker and darker. I haven't seen any sea animals around yet, which was a little concerning, but I couldn't go back, so I pushed forward and continued to swim down. I turned on my flashlight once it got too dark where I couldn't see anything. I couldn't see any organisms this deep. Normally, this would be the part of the sea where you find animals like sharks or special fish, but nothing. Did I come at the wrong time, or am I this stupid as a human to notice anything? Whatever it is, truly beats me. Once I swam deep enough, I saw something. A shipwreck. It was worn and torn to bits. It's like a kraken assaulted it and dragged it into the sea, to a place no one, except me and maybe the chance of a fish or something to see, to ever find it. Of course, that can't be the case. Krakens don't exist, right? My thoughts pondered as I swam even closer to the ship. I swam inside the boat through a hole that was on the outside. It looked like a place where people would live. There were cabinets, dining items. I even found a chest filled with nothing. I truly thought something was here, which is why I came down here. My camera was recording all of this, which was a good idea since I probably couldn't prove this all on my own. But after a few minutes of looking around, I just realized it's been 25 minutes. I needed air. If I could swim back up quickly, I could get some oxygen and swim back down. So after I said my goodbyes to the ship, I swam out of it and began my ascent. But the sea had other plans. There was a rush of water and I was almost blown off course. I saw a bunch of slimy, tentacle-like tendrils as it was followed up by a metallic screech. And then I saw its horrifying face. The face of a massive squid. Or in other words, a kraken. I spent no time trying to swim away, but it swung its tentacle at me, barely missing me. I panicked so badly that I dropped my flashlight. I couldn't swim back down and get it. Even if I managed to evade the kraken, going to grab the light would waste time to reach the surface, which would lead to drowning. I was distracted, and it grabbed me. Its slimy tentacle wrapped around me tightly. I felt a massive rush of air leave my lungs. It felt as if my rib cage was being damaged and I would be squeezed to death. It held me in front of it and squeezed me even harder. Normally, if I was on the surface, I'd scream in pain, but I'm underwater. I can't do that. No one can hear me. No one can see me. It wasn't doing anything. It was just tightening its grip as it gawked at me, and then, still holding me, showed its spiny teeth and was pulling me closer and closer. I tried to squirm free, but its grip was too tight. I couldn't break free. I had a small pocket knife for emergency purposes, and it happened to be right where my camera was, on a rope-like necklace. I tore it off, and I proceeded to stab it deep into the kraken. It screeched in pain as it lost grip of me because it was too focused on the wound. I took the knife out of it so it could bleed out, although from its massive size, it probably wouldn't die from a wound that small. I managed to escape the sights of the kraken, but I ran out of air, and after trying to push through, it wasn't enough. And I drowned. I was revived later via CPR. The boat driver saw my body and broke his orders to get my limp body to the boat where he soon drove me to shore. I was sent to the hospital, and an X-ray scan showed that, except my skull, my entire body, especially my rib area, received significant damage. And while it wasn't lethal and I could still live, I would need intensive recovery, and too much movement could slow down the process. I was driven back to my job. They decided that due to the injury, I should take my stuff home as I was going to take a break from working. So I was forcibly suspended. When we arrived, I immediately checked my torso area. There was a massive black bruise on my stomach. It looked like a line with circles. Touching it hurt badly, obviously, but this was a new type of pain. It felt as if I was being hit with burning rocks in the bruised area each time I touched it. I grabbed my stuff and left the workplace, driving home. We didn't tell the doctors and nurses about the footage or my adventure down into the Challenger Deep. They didn't think they would take us seriously. We decided not to publicly upload the footage to prevent anything rash happening. But the past is in the past. There's nothing I can do. And I still love the ocean. Have you ever heard of the legend of Neptune's Grace? It's a tale often shared among sailors and fishermen, designed to keep us vigilant or perhaps to give us a bit of a scare. According to the legend, many years ago, there was a grand and majestic ship named Neptune's Grace. Its crew was renowned for their bravery and daring voyages. They roamed the seas, dominating territories and fighting in numerous wars. They embarked on perilous hunts, always seeking adventure. Captain Elias and his men had weathered many terrible storms and faced countless battles. One fateful night, as they sailed the calm seas, peering into the vast open darkness, their radars detected something lurking in the water below. "What is it?" Captain Elias asked. "I don't know, Captain," the crewmate responded honestly. The crew scrambled to search the horizon but saw nothing but endless waves. The water seemed calm and peaceful, as if nothing was happening. However, their radars were now sending an alarm throughout the ship. As the crewmen looked out into the sea, they were horrified to see the calm sea shatter, as if the sea itself was splitting open. A monstrous sea creature emerged from the depths of the ocean and let out a screeching howl that was felt more than heard. The sea creature was enormous, measuring over 100 feet long. It was covered in thick, impenetrable scales that glowed with a strange bioluminescence. Its eyes were wide, diamond-shaped, and a deep golden yellow. Its mouth was a cavernous maw filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. The crew immediately sprang into action, firing cannons and rounds of ammunition at the creature. But it had no effect. Instead, it only angered the beast. The sea creature lunged at Neptune's Grace, destroying the ship and plunging the sailors into the deep sea. One by one, the creature struck from beneath them, pulling each sailor under to their deaths. The sailors watched in horror as their crewmates and friends were violently attacked and dragged beneath the waves, never to return. Their screams were swallowed by the night in the deep, dark depths of the sea. Now, several years later, the story has become more of a legend. However, a few people claim to have spotted the ghostly ship of Neptune's Grace. And I happen to be one of them. One moonlit night, I was out on my small fishing boat, miles away from the shoreline. The sea was calm, with the only sound being the water gently lapping against the hull. The fish weren't biting tonight for some reason, and I had been there for hours. I figured I'd throw my net out one more time before calling it a night and heading home. As I threw my net out, I got a strange feeling. I looked up into the distance and could make out an object that looked similar to another boat. I continued my fishing, but as the boat approached, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. When the boat got a few hundred feet away, I could make out some of its details. Firstly, it wasn't just some boat. It was a huge ship with enormous sails and a towering mast. I could make out a carving on the side of its hull, depicting a long sea creature similar to a snake or an eel. As the ship moved right past me, I saw the name in bold white letters. Neptune's Grace. I stumbled backwards, almost falling off my boat. I stared in disbelief and slight horror as the ship glided through the sea. That's when I noticed that the ship never once disturbed the seawater. As I watched the ship, I could have sworn I saw someone peep over the side and wave at me. And then, in a few seconds, it vanished into the waves. I quickly steered my boat back to shore, my mind racing from the haunting sight I had just witnessed. When I reached the shore, I didn't immediately tell everyone what I had seen, but when a friend of mine brought up the legend of Neptune's Grace, I had to share my encounter. Of course, they didn't believe me, but I still refuse to go fishing alone now.
The sea princess returned to consciousness with difficulty, the muddy green water blurring and slowing down time and being. The water tasted strange, lacking the sharp, clean saltiness she had grown up with. She realized she must be in a lake. How she got there, she had no idea, since her last memory was of her tormented body hitting the fierce, crashing waves before blissfully dissolving. She twisted around and considered her long, delicate stems, reaching deep into the strange green water. She was a water lily. She heard cries of joy, splashing. She had heard those sounds before. She had loved it so much. She had wanted her own child so much. She still did. She floated, the sun warming her leaves, the water holding her stem and roots strongly. She was comfortable now, but the pain she had suffered was still fresh, like walking on sharp knives. Why had she agreed? Rage, regret, and loneliness filled her being, and sounds of splashing and laughter made it sharper. The splashing grew closer. Her stems twitched with longing. She sensed the young, lovely, rounded human limbs close by her, and she wanted them, wanted to wrap her lily stems around them tight and draw them deep under the green water, the hair float gently, the face creased in agony before it became still and peaceful. The child drew carelessly closer. The sea princess caressed the soft limbs. The child twitched and yelled and tried to paddle away. It was too late. She grabbed her green stem, crisscrossing the legs and arms, and pulled the child under, stifling its cries. The child was still very soon. Now there were two of them, floating as water lilies in the beautiful green lake. The sea princess was not so lonely anymore, but knew they would have more joining them soon.
Is it normal for birds to be on a beach at night? Hi there. I would like an expert on birds here because I still can't get over what the heck I just saw. So, some background first. I live in one of those towns that have a beach next to them. I'm not saying what town because that isn't important. I am in my teen years and a bit rebellious, but I don't cause trouble or break rules with my parents or anybody. There is one rule that is set, and that is to never go outside at dark, which, even though I can understand their parent worries, isn't really needed because we live in a relatively safe neighborhood, but I suppose you can never be sure, huh? And I have broken this rule many times. Just to take a walk on the beach because, well, I just enjoy the moonlight and the waves under the night sky. Keeps me calm, basically. And also the fact that I just like being alone. I've done this nightly and haven't been caught because who really cares? Again, I live in a safe neighborhood, so no need to be worried about being kidnapped or anything. Of course, with that context background out of the way, my opinion on that has changed dramatically. Last night, I was walking alongside the beach as usual, making sure that I don't walk too far as always. I think I went out longer than usual, but that uneasy feeling pushed me to go back. As I was near the stairway that leads up from the beach to my town, though, I noticed that some seagulls were on the beach, on the wet sand, cawing and such. Sure, they flew around, but not high up and not away from the water. As anybody would be, I was pretty confused because I'm pretty sure that birds like seagulls don't really stay up so late, and only a bird like an owl or something would wake at night. And I stopped and stared at the group of birds, wondering why they were even there in the first place. Then, I heard something walking on the sand behind me. It was only on the side, closer to my right ear, but you get what I mean. That made me feel really anxious because usually nobody besides myself walks on the beach at night, and no matter how much I thought about just heading to the stairway, something compelled me, forced me to turn around to see who the heck could be up so late other than me. There was an instant fear when I finished turning around. Not because there was some creep or someone similar that was there. It was because what I saw wasn't human. This thing was a bird creature, a body type like a human, but slightly slouched and had no feathers or eyes, the skin looking saggy and like a naked bird or something. It had claws, crab claws, but the arm was not the arm of a crab. It just just where the possible hands would be. And the claws were pretty thick and black. There were also talons and a beak that were thick and black too. And they looked like they were made out of crab claws. Even the transparent skin thing that lets crabs move their claws were present around the black parts, at least around the beak. It was walking slowly on the beach, hearing its steps from the sand as it slowly approaches the group of seagulls. I don't know if it was a blind creature because of having no visible eyes, but I didn't really want to find out. Once the thing was with the group, the birds didn't even react. It was like as if it wasn't even present. I'm pretty sure they would have flown away, thinking that it was some large bird predator about to eat them, and yet they didn't do anything to fly away and escape. And that guess about being a carnivore to the birds was probably right, because I saw the creature stop once it was in the middle of the flock. It looked down at one of the birds, leaned over, and picked it up, again with no reaction. The bird fit so perfectly and like it was in a nest or something. It stared at the seagull in its grip. And then out of nowhere, just sliced the thing in half in its claw before opening its daggers back up. I could see the poor bird's guts spilling out between that death trap waiting to happen as the life of the thing was snuffed out immediately like a light. And then it feasted on the gore in its grip, like it was a bowl of worms. I was almost ready to throw up then and there, but I just stared, this time in shock, and the other avians still didn't do anything. They just let it happen. The creature continued feasting until it stopped and looked at me. I could feel my heart beating fast and hard and hear my brain telling me to get out of there. That advice was taken when it dropped the dead bird and started running at me. My legs hauled me as fast as they could to the stairway into my town, into my house, quickly shutting the door and going into my room, locking the door tight and covering my windows by pulling down the blinds and drawing in the curtains. I just stayed in bed the rest of the night. Couldn't sleep. I was still thinking about what would have happened if it had caught me. Would it have gutted me alive? Would it have bitten my neck or choked me or sliced my head clean off like a big pair of scissors? I didn't want to go out. I didn't want to test fate. I don't even know if it actually followed me home, and I still don't want to find out. And now I'm tired, scared, and never wanting to go out to the beach at night ever again. So, to repeat my question, is it normal for birds to be on a beach at night? It was in a little Ziploc bag, somehow completely dry, but it was dead. I went back home and plugged it in. For 2 weeks, it stayed on the charger. "It's broken," said everyone who saw it. But I didn't give up on it. After those 2 weeks, it lit up with the familiar Apple logo before displaying the home screen. The phone's home screen was a photo of a little girl that looked to be 5 to 7 years old, cute as a button, playing with a dog. I was surprised when I tried to open it that it had no password. The only app visible on the home screen was the Notes app. I spent about half an hour debating on whether I should open it or not. They clearly wanted me to see whatever was inside the Notes app, or else they wouldn't have hidden everything else, right? I caved, and I opened the app. It was a log of some sorts, like a diary. I began to read. I don't know how to explain what I read or even where to talk about it, so I'm just gonna talk about it here. I'm sorry for disrespecting the owner of this phone's privacy. I don't know where else I can show it, so I'm gonna show it here. And this is what it said. Kaylee has been jumping up and down since I told her we were going to Italy. I had to give her my laptop to watch YouTube and work on my phone instead because she wouldn't shut up about all the things we planned to do. I won't take her to any of the historical landmarks. A 6-year-old wouldn't care about those. We're only staying for 4 days. The first day we're going horse riding by the beach. The next day eating at 10 different restaurants and seeing which is the best. And on the last day, I'm taking her on a boat in Venice. This is the same exact trip I took with my wife 8 years ago, the same trip I proposed to her on. I wanted to take Kaylee here so she could know how it all began exactly. We've been having so much fun over the last 2 days, I haven't had any time to type in here. We were getting on the boat now. We're about to get on the boat now. I just told Kaylee what happened on a boat just like this one, and she's super excited. She couldn't believe she was on the same trip me and her mother took to get married. I proposed to her on a boat like this. She was jumping up and down like she always does when she's excited, but something strange happened. The guy who's rowing the boat turned his head and frowned at her, but there was something alarmingly wrong about his face, his expression, the way his neck twisted. I apologized and he continued to row. I told Kaylee to try and not move a lot as the boat is not that big. She agreed and leaned on one side, watching the buildings around her. They were all kinds of colors and sizes. She waved at everyone and most of them waved back. It's adorable. I laid my head back a bit and somehow fell asleep. This was very strange as I'm prone to seasickness. I laid my head back a bit and somehow fell asleep. This is very strange as I'm prone to seasickness. What was stranger is where the boat was. It was no longer in a river with colorful buildings on each side, but rather on a big ocean. I was kind of thrown back by this and asked Kaylee where we were, and to my surprise, she was also asleep. I looked up at the sky, and it was nighttime. Last I recall, it was sunset. Have I really slept for that long? Why hasn't the boat driver woken me up? I went up to him and tapped him on the shoulder. This time he let go of the oars, and they fell into the now ocean and sunk. Aren't boat oars supposed to float? He looked at me with that now familiar frown, his eyes only a few inches away from mine. I fell back and he got new oars and continued rowing. I have no idea where he got them from. The boat is not big enough to carry oars of that size, and even if it was, I have not seen any spares on the boat. When I fell back, I got a good look of the sky. It was completely blank, no moon, no clouds, no stars. You'd think that was normal due to pollution, but how is there pollution in the middle of the ocean? And Kaylee woke up around here and she began to panic. I immediately hugged her and shushed her as not to anger the driver anymore. She asked at least 20 questions, which were all met with an "I don't know." I'm as terrified as she is, if not more. The situation I'm in is already bad enough, but I have a 6-year-old with me who I have to ensure always stays calm. We hugged and I told her in an unsure tone, "We're gonna be okay, baby doll. It's okay." After I said that, the driver flung his oar back and 2 giant fish landed on the boat. They smelled weird, almost like they were cooked, seasoned even. I took a good sniff before biting one. It tasted amazing. Probably the first good thing that happened to us. I ate one first and waited a bit to make sure it wasn't poison before allowing Kaylee to eat. I've been trying my hardest to act calm for her. If I panic, then she panics and we all go down. If I panic, then she panics and then we all go down. I began to sing her lullabies to calm her down, though there were a million things going on in my mind. How would I drink? How would I eat? Where am I? How did I sleep in the boat? Why am I not getting seasick? I was panicked inside my mind, though I wouldn't let Kaylee know about it. This is already a difficult enough situation without a panicked 6-year-old. It just turned from day to night in a second. I didn't have any time to react. Again, there's no sun or clouds to be visible. The water was still a very dark blue. It feels like it goes down hundreds, if not thousands of kilometers. It feels like the void from Subnautica, but without the Leviathans, thankfully. I don't know how, but Kaylee woke up and she wasn't panicked. Another 2 fish were pushed by the oar. This time I let Kaylee eat with me. We need water, I thought, the moment I thought that, it began to rain. But we were not getting wet. It was raining, but the rain wasn't actually falling, neither on the boat nor on the water. I decided to take a sip of the water. I have no idea why, but it just seemed like something I had to do. It was fresh water, tasted very clean, too. I once again waited for any side effects before letting Kaylee drink. It's been 1 week of us being stranded on this boat. I think the worst thing about it is that we have an excuse to live. We have consistent food and practically infinite water, but there is absolutely nothing stopping us from losing our minds. I can't throw myself over. I have a 6-year-old daughter with me, though I have contemplated throwing us both off the edge of the boat. After 2 more weeks of this nonsense, I decided to take action. I broke off a piece of wood, sharp enough to kill if I had to, and went up to the driver who was rowing this boat for 3 weeks straight. He looked at me, his eyes widened and his dark skin darkened. He then stood up, looking down at me before jumping off the boat. I heard a very, very disturbing noise that I can't quite describe with words before blood came to the surface. The blood darkened and it turned into dark brown, the same color of his skin. "This isn't his blood," I muttered. For a moment, I had forgotten that I have a 6-year-old with me. She wasn't crying, but the expression on her face made me want to cry. It was fear. That's all I could say that was on my daughter's face. Fear. The daily cooked and seasoned fish stopped coming in, and I can tell the water below us is draining, quickly. I don't know what's happening, so I'm going to throw my phone into the water. To whoever finds this, if anyone, please go to a toy store and buy a dinosaur stuffed animal and throw it into the ocean. It's my daughter's favorite animal, and it would comfort her knowing that her stuffed dinosaur is coming to rescue us. Horrified by what I had just read, I did as instructed. I bought a stuffed dinosaur and threw it into the ocean. It moved away very fast and sunk into the water. I sat down, just thinking, processing, when I remembered my brother took my niece on a boat in Venice. I rushed to text him, but my messages were not sent. The last trace of him was an Instagram story. It was a selfie of him and his daughter on the boat. In the background was a dark-skinned driver with an odd, twisted neck and a frown I can't get behind. I can think of anywhere else to share my story, but people need to know. Unfortunately, my story doesn't begin any different than most others. It was a usual, uneventful kind of day. Until it wasn't. The sun was low when we started the day. The three of us, myself, my husband Dom, and his best friend Tyler, had decided to call in sick to work in favor of a sneaky midweek fishing trip. Spring had finally come, and I'd woken that day to look out at the ocean. It was flat as grass, shimmering like diamonds without a white peak in sight. The sky was empty of any clouds, and there was not enough wind to even shift my fringe from my sleepy eyes. I flopped back down in bed next to my husband, Dom. I suppose he could tell from my expression that there was mischief on my mind. He didn't take much convincing. He'd already been nursing a sore back from working overtime on the weekend, and, as I assured him, he'd earned a bit of R&R. We couldn't forget his best friend Tyler. He was never going to be left alone while we spent the day lounging on the boat, beers in hand and lines in the water. It only took us about 30 minutes to pack the cars, and most importantly, the esky before we were driving towards the harbor, music on blast and phones turned off. Soon we were cruising out towards our favorite spot, Gaptooth Rock. It was a collection of 2 pillars of stone jutting out of the water connected to a long break of a reef. It looked like a pair of crooked buck teeth, hence the name that had once been the home of a colony of fur seals. However, when we were setting up the boat, I overheard one of the tour charters lamenting that there had been no sightings of seals for some time. Most just assumed they had moved on. Others at the marina vehemently denied that and stated that something in the water was preying on them. Tyler, Dom, and I agreed. Most likely they were being taken by sharks. It was the general consensus, and a few anglers boasted excitedly that they would be the ones to return with a white pointer, belly full of fur seal. But as there had been no sighting of any sharks for over a month, I was disappointed when we reached the teeth that were no seals to be seen. Handing me the first drink of the day as a consolation, my husband tried to cheer me up as he baited my line, smiling at me and squinting against the sun. "Maybe you'll catch a shark instead," he joked. Always the optimist, he claimed that less seals meant more fish for us. For a few hours, we just laid out on the boat, talking about everything and nothing while our speakers sang with my 90s playlist as a backing soundtrack for us. Nothing was out of the ordinary, drinks were drunk, jokes were made, and Tyler shared a little too much about his activities with his new girlfriend. Things only got weirder when I felt a sharp pull on my rod. I knew immediately that something wasn't right. The way the line was pulled was just too sharp, so abrupt. One yank and then absolutely nothing. There wasn't even a ripple on the water left over. I frowned and stood up to move to the side of the boat, pushing my polarized lenses up my nose so I could get a better look through the water. I thought at first I'd snagged the reef that grounded the teeth, but I'd made a point not to cast so close to the rocks. I'd lost a good dozen lures on prior trips, and I knew to avoid them. A second yank came, and I had to brace myself against the boat for a second. It was so strong that I almost lost my rod overboard. I planted my feet, and I started to pull back. The rod almost doubled over on itself, and I thought it was going to snap as it curved toward the water. I grimaced as I pulled against the great force. The line remained tense, as if it was frozen in place to the ocean. The line had no slack, and the reel wouldn't budge at all. Suddenly, there came an awful sound. I don't even know how to describe it, but it was enough that I dropped the rod in favor of covering my ears. It was as if it was a cacophony of every awful sound I had ever heard. The high-pitched ringing of a car alarm, the crushing of metal, a jet breaking the sound barrier, and nails on a chalkboard, all combined in one. I looked around me to try and see the source of the noise. My rod was hanging over the side of the boat, and the water was still glassy. Dom and Tyler were behaving strangely. It was like they weren't hearing what I was. Their eyes were fixed on the water, their backs rigid. The sight made all the hair on my arms stand up, and gritting my teeth, I stood to go and check on them. Neither responded to my calls. They just stared, frozen at the water, their lines tense like mine had been reaching down into the dark. The noise was filling my head, so loud I couldn't think of anything aside from how wrong everything felt. How my whole body was screaming over the noise that I needed to leave. I tried to pull them away from the edge of the boat, which was now starting to slowly pull towards the left side, following the same direction as their lines. I tried yelling their names, tears making my vision foggy as I exclaimed they were taking the joke too far, that I was scared and they needed to stop. I watched my rod slide over the edge and splash into the water, and when Tyler started to reach into the water, it was then, when I was sure my eardrums would burst with the sound, that it finally went silent. I flew into action, snatching the knife from our bait station before looking over to the water. Out of the darkness came a mottled gray arm. Out of the darkness came a mottled gray arm. At the end, there was a clawed fist gripping onto Tyler's braided fishing line. I sliced the line in a panic and pushed both men away from the side of the boat. It took all my strength to force them off their anchored feet, and the two fell back as both lines went slack. The boat righted itself violently, and I would have lost my footing if not for grabbing onto one of the handles on the left side of the boat. I thought I must have been seeing something. Maybe I hadn't drank enough water. Maybe I had listened a little too much at the marina when the fishermen talked about monsters around the teeth. Maybe I had been in the sun just a little too long. Clutching the knife, I peeked back over the boat, and this time, I saw more of the creature. Its eyes were black and beady, with needle-pointed teeth and a sick smile. It glared up at me. Its head looked human-shaped with wet hair slick against the blue-gray scalp. No ears, but the shoulders and the torso of a woman. The underbelly was that of a normal woman, if not for the white and shimmering reflective scales which flashed rainbow in the light from the waist down. It appeared into the depths, and I swear the water around it was darker than I had ever seen. A black, abyssal cloak which shrouded the rest of the monstrosity. I watched water around its head shift as it opened its mouth and took in a breath that the noise came again. It took everything not to cover my ears and duck away from the sound. And again, Tyler and Dom stood to walk back towards the water. I grabbed their arms, but both were stronger than me and easily barged their way past me. I stared into my husband's eyes, usually bright and blue. They were cold gray and vacant, the eyes of a complete stranger and fixed on the horizon. When I looked back, Tyler was leaning over the side of the boat, his face just inches away from the surface. The sight was enough to force me into action, and I flung my hand over the side, slashing the knife wildly at the water. I felt the knife make contact with something, the tug of resistance before the clean slide of the blade against the flesh. The noise stopped instantly at that moment, breaking whatever spell had taken over the men. I grabbed Tyler's collar and yanked him away from the side, looking over as the creature stared back at me. A thin line was carved across its cheek. They were both groggy and confused as I pulled away from them, dropping the knife and running to start the engine before putting the boat into full speed away from Gaptooth Rock. They asked what my problem was, why I was in such a sudden rush, and why I had let their rods just tip over the edge into the sea. I couldn't think of any way to even start explaining what had happened, and seemingly they hadn't been aware through any of it. All I could focus on was getting away from that place. It's been a week since then, and I tried to share this with them. Tyler laughed at me, and Dom asked if I was still taking my medication, a meek, sympathetic smile on his face. I wanted to forget about what I had seen. I wanted to chalk it up to dehydration or sunstroke. But yesterday, they went fishing without me. They promised they would stay away from Gaptooth Rock. But they haven't come back. I don't know why I wasn't affected by that thing like they were, but I'm hoping it'll work to my advantage. I'm writing this from a hired boat, and I think I will leave my phone at the marina once I post this. I don't need it with me. I know the police can't help me. This time, I've added a spear gun to my pathetic arsenal, and I hope this thing, whatever it is, spends some time playing with its food for the sake of Dom and Tyler. Wish me luck, I guess. And stay away from Gaptooth Rock. Thank you so much for listening to this narration. I hope you enjoyed. A quick thank you to my patrons, Rinku Starr, William Hartley, Cupcake Hips, Alonzo, IC Narrates, and Jesse Hartley. Again, thank you all so much for your support. If you've got any prayer requests, feel free to reach out to me on any social media, and I would love to know how I can be praying for you. And also, about each month, I link a different cause in the description to donate money to, people going through some tough surgeries or funds for victims of natural disasters, etc., etc. If you've got a little extra money to give to someone in need, I've got at least one link for you each month in the description. So that's there for you to do that if you feel that you can. Even if it means that you unsubscribe from my Patreon, that's absolutely wonderful. Much love, and thank you guys again for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.